Honey, the visitor's gallery is that way. The young airman sneered, dismissing the quiet woman in front of the silent jet. He had no idea he was talking to the one person on Earth who could save it. The air on the flight line at Edwards Air Force Base was thick enough to taste, a cocktail of shimmering heat, jet fuel, and pure, uncut pressure. At its center, under the unforgiving California sun, sat the source of it all, Ghost 07, an F-35 Lightning II rendered utterly silent on the runway. It was more than just a grounded jet. It was a public relations nightmare unfolding in real time. A delegation of high-ranking NATO generals was already seated in the command tower's VIP lounge, their visit meant to witness a critical readiness exercise. And Ghost 07 was supposed to be the lead aircraft. For the last 3 hours, the base's top maintenance crew had swarmed the $200 million aircraft like ants on a dead beetle, their efforts yielding nothing but frustration. The F-35 was a ghost in its own machine, its complex nervous system completely dark. Standing a respectful distance away was Dr. Evelyn Reed. At 60-something, she was a study in contrast to the high-tech crisis before her. Dressed in simple jeans, comfortable walking shoes, and a plain, wind-worn travel jacket, she could have been a tourist who'd taken a very wrong turn. Her silver-white hair was pulled back in a simple, no-nonsense ponytail. But it was her eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue, that set her apart. They weren't looking at the jet. They were reading it, her gaze tracing lines of power and data flow that only she could see, as if she were in silent communion with the crippled beast of steel and wire. The lead technician, a young man named Jaden, radiated an almost visible aura of stress. His face was flushed, a vein throbbing in his temple. When he spotted Evelyn, he saw not a person, but a target for his boiling over frustration. "Ma'am, you can't be here," he snapped, his voice sharp with the false authority of a man losing control. He strode over, crossing his arms. "This is a restricted military zone." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver from the F-35. Jaden's condescension deepened. "Look, I don't know how you got out here, but you need to leave. Now." He gestured vaguely toward the distant base entrance. "I think you're looking for the museum." A few of his younger team members, eager to follow their leader's cue, snickered. "This is a $200 million piece of hardware, lady, not a park bench," Jaden continued, stepping closer to her. "What do you think you're doing?" Finally, Evelyn turned her head. Her blue eyes met his. There was no fear, no anger, not even a flicker of irritation. There was only a profound, unnerving focus, as if Jaden were a minor, buzzing distraction in a room that held a far more compelling puzzle. The pressure of the ticking clock was immense. The wing commander's voice, growing colder with each transmission, was a constant threat over the radio net. Jaden felt his career prospects dimming with every passing minute. This old woman's presence was the final, absurd insult. "I need to see your flight line pass." "Identification. Now," he demanded, his voice echoing with a manufactured confidence. He was going to make an example of her. Dr. Evelyn Reed didn't reach for a wallet or an ID badge. Instead, her hand moved with a slow, deliberate grace to the worn canvas messenger bag at her hip. Jaden let out a short, incredulous laugh. "What's in there you're knitting? You gonna stitch the fly-by-wire system back together for us?" He mocked, eliciting another round of nervous chuckles from his crew. Evelyn ignored him. She unzipped the bag and produced a small, rolled-up pouch made of soft, dark velvet, tied with a simple leather cord. She unrolled it on a nearby equipment case with the care of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were not knitting needles, but a small, curated set of tools. They were unlike anything Jaden had ever seen. They weren't standard issue. Some looked handmade, their steel burnished with a patina of age and purpose. One was a long, slender probe of a non-conductive material, its tip ending in a uniquely grooved, almost microscopic fork. Jaden stared, his derision deepening. "Are you kidding me? Where did you get that junk at a garage sale? You probably worked on propeller planes, didn't you, Grandma? Things were a lot simpler back then." As Jaden's taunts hung in the hot air, Evelyn's fingers brushed against the handle of the peculiar insulated probe. The feel of the worn, familiar tool was a key, unlocking a door in her mind. The sun-bleached runway dissolved into the sterile, humming quiet of the Skunk Works clean room in Palmdale decades ago. The air smelled of ozone and chilled, filtered air. A younger Evelyn, her hair still brown, stood before a panel of skeptical, gray-suited executives. She was arguing passionately with the program's chief engineer, a man who saw her as a brilliant but stubborn subordinate. The resonance frequency of the proposed alloy for the primary power bus terminal is too susceptible to microfractures under sustained high-G stress, she had insisted, pointing to a complex equation on the screen. It needs to be a beryllium-gallium composite. It's more resilient. The chief engineer had overruled her. The current spec is within tolerance, Evelyn. The added cost of the composite is unjustifiable. She remembered the feeling of frustrated certainty, the knowledge that a tiny, almost undetectable flaw was being deliberately engineered into the heart of the machine. A flaw that would, under the exact wrong set of circumstances, cause a catastrophic failure. The memory vanished in a flash, a whisper from the past that informed the stillness of the present. On the far side of the flight line, Master Sergeant Anya Sharma was watching the confrontation with a growing sense of unease. A 30-year veteran with avionics grease practically in her DNA, she'd seen arrogant team leads like Jaden come and go. At first, she was just annoyed that a civilian had gotten this far. But then she started to study the old woman. It wasn't just her calm demeanor. It was her stance. Though she wore civilian clothes, she stood with a subtle, ingrained discipline. Her posture was erect, her shoulders squared, her attention absolute. It was the bearing of a soldier. And the way she studied the F-35, it was the gaze of a diagnostician, a creator sizing up a flawed masterpiece. Jaden's patience finally snapped. He reached out and grabbed Evelyn's upper arm. That's it, old-timer. Field trip's over. That was the moment for Anya Sharma. The physical contact, the utter disrespect. It triggered a memory, a ghost story whispered in maintenance bays about the F-35's early development. A legendary ghost engineer, a woman who is said to know the plane's soul. Her heart suddenly pounding, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to a number she rarely used. The direct line to the office of the wing commander. The phone call landed like a tactical strike in the wing commander's office. Colonel Marcus Thorne was in the middle of a tense briefing, the grounded F-35 the only infuriating topic. His executive officer burst in without knocking, an act that would normally earn him a week of scut work. "Sir, you need to take this. It's Master Sergeant Sharma on the flight line. It's about the civilian." Thorne snatched the phone, his face a thundercloud. "What is it, Sergeant?" He listened, his expression shifting from anger to confusion, then to stunned disbelief. His knuckles went white. "Say that name again." He listened once more. The color drained from his face. "Are you sure?" "Dr. Evelyn Reed." He shot to his feet, knocking his chair back with a loud crash. "Give me your file." Thorne barked at his aide. "The living legend file. The one that's dual encrypted. Now!" The aide, sensing the seismic shift in the room, scrambled from his desk and sprinted towards the secured records vault. Colonel Thorne turned his attention back to the phone, his voice now a low, urgent command. "Listen to me very carefully, Sergeant. Get on the radio to the flight line. I want you to tell that technician, by my authority, to stand down. Do not let anyone touch that woman. Do not let anyone speak to her. Everyone is to freeze. Is that clear?" "That is a direct order from the wing commander. I am on my way." He slammed the phone down and grabbed his flight cap. "Get the command car. Now, clear the way to the main runway." But on the sun-baked concrete, the order had not yet arrived. Time on a flight line can move in strange ways. 10 seconds can stretch into an eternity. For Jaden, emboldened by Evelyn's continued silence, this was his moment to reassert his authority. He was still holding her thin arm, a tangible symbol of his control. He leaned in, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Look, I get it. Things get confusing when you get older. But you're a danger to yourself into this equipment. For your own safety, I'm taking you to the security office. They'll get you checked out, maybe call your family." He was effectively declaring the old woman senile, a final, public humiliation. He gave her arm a firm tug, intending to march her across the tarmac in a walk of shame. "Let's go. The show's over." It was at that precise moment that a new sound cut through the air. It wasn't the whine of a jet engine or the crackle of a radio. It was the piercing wail of sirens, and they were getting closer, fast. But these weren't the familiar whoop-whoop of a base patrol. This was the powerful, deep yelp of command escort vehicles. Heads turned. In the distance, a black staff car, flanked by two imposing security trucks, was racing towards them, lights flashing. They didn't slow as they approached the congested area, but sped on with an alarming lack of caution, scattering airmen who leaped out of the way. The convoy screeched to a halt in a perfectly executed formation just yards from the F-35, creating a barrier between the crowd and the scene. The passenger door of the staff car flew open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Colonel Marcus Thorne launched himself out. His face was a mask of controlled fury. The entire flight line froze. The casual chatter, the nervous laughter, the hum of activity, it all ceased. The arrival of a single wing commander on the flight line was a rare and serious event. The arrival of the commander with his entire senior staff, moving like a strike team, was unheard of. Jaden stopped dead, his hand still clamped on Evelyn's arm. He stared, his mind failing to process the scene. Why was the base's top officer here? For him? For this old woman? Colonel Thorne didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the multi-million-dollar jet. His eyes, burning with an intensity that could melt steel, were locked on one thing and one thing only: Jaden's hand on Evelyn Reed's arm. He strode forward, his polished boots eating up the distance on the concrete. He walked right up to Jaden, his gaze so ferocious that the young technician flinched as if he'd been physically struck. Thorne stopped 2 feet from them. He didn't yell. He didn't speak. He simply looked down at Jaden's hand. The meaning was unmistakable. Jaden snatched his hand away as if the old woman's sleeve were red hot. Then, Colonel Thorne turned his full attention to Evelyn. In one crisp, powerful motion, he brought his hand up to his brow and rendered the sharpest, most profound salute of his career. It was a gesture of such deep, unwavering respect that it seemed to vibrate in the silent air. A collective, silent gasp rippled through the crowd of airmen. Jaws dropped, eyes widened. Jaden looked as though the ground had vanished beneath his feet. "Ma'am," Colonel Thorne said, his voice ringing with emotion for all to hear. "It is an honor." He held the salute for a long, pregnant moment before slowly lowering his hand. He then turned his head slightly, addressing Jaden, but speaking loud enough for every person on the tarmac to hear his words as a formal decree. "Technician," he began, his voice dangerously quiet. "You stand there in that uniform, and you don't even know how to recognize an officer of the United States Air Force when she's standing right in front of you." A murmur of confusion went through the crowd. Thorne's gaze returned to Evelyn. "This is Dr. Evelyn Reed, former captain, United States Air Force, retired." The first shockwave hit. Jaden swayed, his face completely drained of color. He had manhandled a veteran officer, but the colonel was just getting started. For the benefit of those who are too young or too ignorant to know whose presence they are in, he boomed, his voice now filled with authority. "Allow me to educate you. Dr. Reed is not just a veteran. She was a lead design engineer for the original YF-35 prototype. She personally wrote 5 chapters of the flight control systems manual that you technicians use every single day. The very fly-by-wire system that's giving you fits? She holds 3 of the core patents on it." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. During the initial test flights, a ghost signal anomaly grounded the entire test squadron. The Pentagon was scrambling. While they were still holding meetings in air-conditioned rooms, this woman, then a captain, took a single oscilloscope into a hangar, sat with the bird for 72 hours straight, and found a software bug so deep in the source code that the original programmer swore it couldn't exist. She didn't just find it. She rewrote the patch herself on site and got the entire program back on track. The silence on the tarmac was now one of pure, unadulterated awe. Master Sergeant Sharma, watching from the edge of the scene, simply nodded, a look of profound validation on her face. This woman, Colonel Thorne concluded, his voice softening with reverence as he looked back at Evelyn, has forgotten more about the F-35 than any of us will ever know. She is not just a part of this aircraft's history. She is a living part of its soul. Finally, the full, terrifying weight of what he had done crashed down on Jaden. He had not just disrespected an old woman. He had mocked a founding mother. He had threatened a legend. He had assaulted an officer. Colonel Thorne turned, and the warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by a gaze as cold and hard as Arctic ice. He fixed it on Jaden. "Technician," he said, his voice deceptively soft, lethal. "What is your name?" "Jaden, sir." "Airman First Class Jaden Peterson," he stammered, his own name sounding foreign and foolish in his mouth. "Airman Peterson," Thorne said, the name tasting like poison. "Your arrogance and your ignorance today have brought shame to this wing. You were faced with a problem you couldn't solve, a failure of your own technical skill, and you chose to channel that failure into cruelty. You chose to humiliate a woman whose boots you are not worthy of polishing." He stepped closer, his voice dropping even lower. "You looked at a living legend and saw nothing but a target for your own inadequacy. You are a disgrace to that uniform." The public rebuke was devastating, a professional execution performed in front of the entire flight line. Jaden stood paralyzed by shame, unable to look away from the colonel's wrath. But then a quiet voice cut through the tension. "Colonel, that's enough." It was Evelyn. She had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, but now she spoke. Her voice was not strong, but it carried an undeniable authority that even the wing commander instantly obeyed. Thorne fell silent, turning to her with a look of deference. Evelyn Reed looked at the trembling young man. She looked at Jaden, not with anger or pity, but with the calm gaze of teacher. "Son," she said gently, "the machine doesn't care about your rank. It doesn't care about your pride. It only cares about the truth of the problem." She raised a slightly shaky hand and pointed not at the complex avionics bay where Jaden's team had been working, but at a small, almost hidden panel near the port side landing gear strut. "You were all looking in the wrong place," Evelyn explained. "You were looking at the brain. The problem isn't in the brain, it's in the nerves." She pointed again. "Right there. That's the primary power distribution bus for the emergency power unit. It's a known issue on the Block 4S, especially after a cold soak at altitude, followed by a rapid warm-up on the ground. The terminal pin for the bypass actuator can develop a microdeformation. It's out of alignment by less than a micron, but that's enough to break the circuit." She looked down at the velvet pouch in her hand, which she had held on to this whole time. She unrolled it and picked out the strange, custom-made insulated probe. She held it out to Jaden. "You don't need a computer. You just need to give it a little nudge to remind it what it's supposed to do." As Jaden hesitantly reached for the tool, his fingers brushed against Evelyn's. Under the silent, watchful gaze of the wing commander, his own crew, and the woman he had ridiculed, he walked to the F-35. He knelt down, his movements stiff with dread and humiliation. He found the small actuator Evelyn had indicated. It looked insignificant, an afterthought in the jet's complex anatomy. He raised the probe. For a moment, he hesitated, the entire flight line holding its breath. Then, with a gentle, precise motion, he inserted the fork tip and nudged the pin. Click! The sound was tiny, almost lost in the vastness of the tarmac. But it was followed by another, more significant sound, a soft, satisfying hiss of released pressure. A cascade of relays seating themselves. And then, magic! The cockpit of the F-35 flickered to life. The dashboard screens glowed green. The voice of the onboard computer, a calm female voice known affectionately as Bitching Betty, announced main power online. The auxiliary power unit began to whine, spooling up to speed. The dead predator was alive. A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the crowd. The problem that had stumped a team of trained technicians with thousands of dollars of diagnostic equipment for 3 hours had just been solved in 3 seconds, with a nudge from a homemade tool in the hands of an old woman. Colonel Thorne stared at the illuminated cockpit, then back at Evelyn, a look of profound respect on his face. He turned to the maintenance group commander. "I want Airman Peterson and his entire team off the line. They are to report for a week-long training seminar starting at 0800 tomorrow. The topic," he said, looking at Evelyn, "will be the history and legacy of the F-35 airframe. And the first lesson will be taught by Dr. Reed, if she would do us the honor." Weeks later, the heat of the incident had cooled, but its impact lingered. Jaden Peterson was a different man. The swaggering arrogance had been sandblasted away, replaced by a quiet, intense humility. He spent his off-duty hours in the base library, poring over old technical orders and design schematics, trying to learn what he had so clearly missed. One afternoon, he saw her. Dr. Evelyn Reed was sitting in a worn armchair in the history section, reading a book. Jaden's heart pounded. He bought 2 cups of coffee from the small kiosk and walked over, his steps hesitant. "Dr. Reed," he said quietly. Evelyn looked up from her book, her pale blue eyes holding a spark of recognition, but no malice. I wanted to say thank you," Jaden stammered, placing a coffee on the small table beside her. "For the lesson. And I'm sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse." Evelyn looked at the genuine remorse in the young man's eyes. She gave a small, forgiving nod and gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Sit down, son." Jaden sat. They didn't speak of the incident on the tarmac again. Instead, Evelyn started talking. She talked about the feel of the wind over a new wing design, about the smell of a hot engine after a record-breaking flight, about the challenge of making a machine that was smarter and faster than the pilot, but still obeyed him like a part of his own body. She spoke of the plane not as a weapon, but as a living creation, full of compromises and triumphs. And Jaden listened, finally understanding that the soul of the machine was not in its wires or its software, but in the spirit and integrity of the people who created it. The story of Dr. Evelyn Reed and the silent F-35 became a quiet legend at Edwards, a mandatory lesson for every new technician. It was a powerful reminder that true greatness often walks among us, hidden in plain sight, waiting not for recognition, but for a problem to solve. If you were moved by the story of this unassuming hero, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more stories that deserve to be told. In the comments below, tell us about a time someone's quiet expertise completely blew you away. And as always, please comment with respect.